Sometimes when I get sick, the first part of my body to start to hurt is my throat. And on 2 occasions, I have lost my voice. As a communication instructor, I find it interesting when all of a sudden I'm not able to verbally communicate to somebody else and to see how do they react. Sometimes we just have to get creative. Sometimes it's just pen and paper, and sometimes I notice there's some issues there, especially with how effective or ineffective our verbal communication can be. Communication, true or false? I'm going to ask you a statement, and I want you to see if you agree with it or if you disagree with it. I've been communicating my entire life, therefore I already know everything about communication. This is false, because effective communication is not just common sense. I wish it were, but it's not. There are even times where we know exactly what we should do, what we should say, and yet we still don't do it. In this chapter, we're going to look at some characteristics and functions of verbal communication. Then we'll discuss, how can we make verbal communication cooperative? And then we'll look at the barriers to that cooperative verbal communication. And overall, we'll discuss the power of verbal communication in our everyday lives. So let's get started and look at the verbal communication characteristics. Now, as you can see, there are several here. The language is symbolic, language is governed by rules, language is flexible, is cultural, and that language evolves. But before we get deep into those, true or false? Meanings are in words. This is false. Communication is contextual. I remember the first time I taught a class that meanings are not in words, that humans have the meaning, because all language is symbolic. The student in that first group to learn that information, who was significantly older than the others, said, "No, that's not true. All words have meaning." And I wasn't denying the fact that we think words have meaning, but I wanted her to realize that language itself is just a symbol. Every single word that we use represents an idea, a process, or a physical entity, but it's something that we made up. D-O-G, dog, isn't necessarily just occurring out in nature. The animal that it represents is out there, but we gave that animal D-O-G. So keep in mind that words are merely just symbols that have been assigned meaning. And when we think about those meanings, we realize that language is governed by rules. The first rule we'll look at here is the constitutive rules. Let's go back to the example of dog. We know that the word dog refers to a domestic canine. That's us looking at how the word is created, its constitution. Essentially, what is the word's definition? But when you look at regulative rules, we look at how we use those words, how we spell those words, how we put them in a sentence structure, i.e. our grammar, and even how we use them in conversation. Sometimes it's as simple as, "Oh, someone asked me a question, I should respond with an answer." That would be a regulative rule. But while we have all these rules, we even have flexibility in our language. Now that may seem like a contradiction, but think about personal idioms. Those words that you've created that you and your friend, or you and your family, or you and your significant other know and understand, and have its own little subjective meaning just for you, but that other people may not fully understand. Even think about slang and how new words are being created every single day. All the words that are considered not words have slowly found their way into our everyday language. Even if you think about it, the word selfie is being added to our dictionaries. Show some flexibility there. Now, sometimes that flexibility just comes from us encountering different cultures. Language will always reveal our speech community, whether it's the word that we use or even how we say it and its usage. For example, if someone speaks Spanish, we know that they come from a speech community where Spanish is dominant. If someone speaks Mandarin, then we know that they come from a country or a culture where Mandarin is dominant. But even when people speak the same language, they may not have the same type of language. They may have variations on it, which may be a dialect. I know that you guys and y'all are pretty much saying the same exact thing, but depending on where you are, it's going to feel different. It's going to feel normal. Even just then when I said you guys, it doesn't feel normal to me. I don't use that phrase very often, but y'all sounds normal. Even think about the fact that language can be cultural depending on how we use the context. Imagine you're a student in a class, and I, as your instructor, say, that trash can is looking pretty full. And I look directly in your direction, or even say your name. The context tells you, maybe my instructor wants me to take out the trash. It's very indirect, and I didn't directly tell you, take out the trash, but you would figure out by the context. In a low context culture, it is all about the words. You need to be direct. You need to tell me what you mean. You can guess that when it comes to the U.S., we are more low context than high context. We want you to tell us what you mean and give us a direct message. We're not the most low context, but we're pretty close. Also be aware that language evolves. Words can be born. Words can get old. Words can die. Language changes as people change. So meanings for particular words may shift. If you look at a dictionary and try to find the original meaning of a word that people barely use anymore, you may be surprised that there are going to be significant changes. I know that the word peruse used to mean to read thoroughly, but we use it now to mean scan. That was a meaning shift. I mentioned earlier about the word selfie. That's a new word that's been created, and I don't think we're going back after using the word selfie for so long now. Sometimes new words enter our world just because we borrow them from other languages. Whether this is some event or some technology or something that wasn't in our world before, now is, thanks to a different culture bringing it over. Or as simple as different groups colliding with each other and learning to meet each other where they are and adapt. And then even regulative rules can change. When I was a kid, he, she, it were the singular pronouns and they was the plural pronoun. I was shocked when I learned that they used to be a singular pronoun, because I was thrilled to know that they was plural and that he, she, and it were your only singular pronouns. But it turns out that before 1850, they could be used as a singular pronoun when you did not know the gender. But after 1850, grammarians made hardcore rules that was no longer the case. Now, with the changes in the LGBT community, especially understanding non-binary people, that rule has started to change again to making they a singular pronoun. As someone who studies language, this is fascinating. So, in this video, we've looked at the characteristics of language, especially when it comes to verbally communicating. In the next video, we'll look at some of the functions of language.